They ought to make a law against watching this. Not because it's entertaining, but because some things, the long, thin shapes at the edge of the trees, the way light stops and leaves begin to move, feel like a private danger you weren't meant to see. These are 3 real encounters that happened right where the pavement meets the woods. Under the gas station canopy, beside a highway rest stop, along a dim shoulder where the pines press close. People walked away. People didn't. The only thing they all share is that for a few minutes, ordinary life gave way to something ugly and unpredictable, and the trees swallowed the answers. Story 1 starts with my sister, Mari. She worked nights at a little station on the county road, the kind of place with a coffee machine that never really heats the water and a lonely fluorescent panel that hums like an animal. Mari was tiny and tough, the sort of person who laughed at my worry and told me to mind my own life. She liked the night shift because she could read, save a few dollars, and finish a 12-hour shift without anyone breathing down her neck. I used to pick her up at 6 in the morning. We'd grab a breakfast sandwich from the deli and drive home together. It felt safe, ordinary. But one morning it wasn't. I slid into the lot and there were more blue and red reflections against the wet asphalt than I'd ever seen there. Crime scene tape threaded around the pumps like a skein of cautionary ribbon. An ambulance was pulling away, siren off. The attendant at the next pump was smoking with his back to the trees, eyes hollow. I felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and walked faster than I intended. They told me she was at the hospital. They told me she had been attacked. The words were clipped, official, the kind that try to make something monstrous into a report. When I saw her through the ER glass, she was pale and fierce at the same time. Her cheek was swollen so badly it had swallowed the corner of her eye. A crooked line of stitches peeked above her brow. Her lip was split. She had a bruise that mapped someone's palm across her temple. The doctor said clinical things: concussion, multiple contusions, a fractured nose. Mari made a joke about it. She said, "He beat me up for $60, like the absurdity of it should make it smaller." I remember wanting to scream at the world for being so mean and small at once. They had security footage. If you work nights at a corner shop, you know the cameras. Grainy, wide angle, the kind that records everything and nothing at once. The clip they showed us later was the kind of thing you replay in your head until it has the texture of film. Night. The station lights were a halo in a dark rectangle. A lanky man emerges from the shadow where the trees press close behind the building. He moves like someone trying not to be noticed but failing. He goes to the pump, then toward the door. The footage shows him approach Mari behind the counter, maybe a few seconds of words we couldn't hear. Then the violence happens fast. He stomps, drags, rips. He takes the register drawer. He walks back into the trees and vanishes. The police found him 20 minutes later. He was crouched against the pines, under a black hoodie, hands wet. He had blood on his jacket, all over the cuffs and sleeves. The squad rolled him to the station and processed what was there. He was arrested for assault, robbery. There were mugshots, fingerprints, the slow bureaucratic rhythm of someone being moved from one claustrophobic room to another. Then the lab report came back and added the kind of detail that makes your teeth clench. The blood soaked in his clothes, not just a little smear, but a lot, didn't match Mari. It didn't match him either. The text told us the test showed a substantial presence of blood that belonged to an unknown person. They were blunt. Large volumes of non-victim, non-suspect blood. I sat with that phrase until it felt like a physical thing inside my ribs. Who else was there that night? Someone in the trees? Someone who never showed up on tape? The police scratched their heads in press statements and said they had no explanation. The suspect wouldn't talk. He sat through the hearing like a man waiting to see how the world would move around him, eyes distant. We had answers of a sort. They had a man in custody and a drawer of stolen money. But the lab had left us with a ghost. There was blood that didn't belong to any of the people we could see on film. A third body, or at least a third source of injury, and then nothing. The shadow of someone else bleeding in the dark. Every time I went back to the gas station after Mari's stitches, the canopy's light trembled with something that wasn't fear so much as an unease, that anything could happen out there, just beyond the neon. The trees seemed to lean closer. Mari healed the visible parts faster than the private ones. She went back to work because she had to. Taxes don't care if you're recovering, and because she refused to be small forever. She carried herself in a way that said no one would steal the rest of her life on their watch. But we started to rearrange ordinary things. I called more.
She changed her cash handling routine. For a long time, she refused to stand with her back to the trees. Small habits like that became the map of our survival. If that first story makes you want to look over your shoulder, wait. There's a second one, and it's the kind that proves the margin between normal and terrifying can be thinner than a window's breadth. It's 4 a.m. and I'm hungry. Not the dramatic movie kind of late-night craving, the kind of hunger that rolls in the pit of your stomach because you worked a stretch shift and the body wants to be fed. The gas station is on the stretch of road that hugs a stand of pines. Their smell rides the air like a memory.
I sit in my car with the engine ticking as it cools and roll the window down because the night is soft and the place is open, and nothing bad ever happened to me in a lot like that. At least, that's what we all tell ourselves. Then a hand taps the glass. It's a quiet sound, 3 wrapped knuckles that makes you snap awake. I look up and there's a figure standing with his hood up. The light throws his face into a slab of darkness. He knocks again and then holds up something metallic. A glint that could be a flashlight, but it isn't. It's a thin, ugly blade catching the canopy light. He taps the knife against the glass like a metronome. "Roll it down," he says. His voice is casual and precise. "Give it up." I do the stupid thing everyone says not to do in the advice columns. I make a choice to buy myself 30 seconds. I pretend to be compliant. I'm moving my hands to reach for the keys when, maybe by adrenaline or by stupidity, I flick the window up. It snaps, metal kissing rubber, and locks like a small obedient trap. He slams his knife against the glass. The sound of metal on glass is nothing like it looks in the movies. It's a thin, panicked ring. He digs the blade into the frame and rocks. The handle of my door shudders under his palm. For a second, he rams his shoulder against it, hard enough that the car judders. He works at the handle, yanking. When nothing gives, he curses and steps back. I look him in the eye, not because I'm brave, but because my body doesn't give me any other instruction. He is young, maybe early 20s, tall, hoodie pulled down low, tired as if he hasn't slept in days. He eyes me with a kind of irritation you reserve for an obstacle. Then he turns and runs toward the nearest patch of trees. I don't wait to see if he circles around. I hit the gas and the world becomes the blur of a taillight. I call the police with both hands shaking. They ask me the same questions they ask everyone: description, direction, weapon. I waited for a follow-up call, a man in handcuffs being brought to the station. Nothing came. Nobody ever called me back to say they'd found him. The thing that isn't always said about these moments is how small the difference feels between survival and the other possibility. A window up or down, a second of hesitation, some line so thin it might have been a gust of wind could have tipped everything. I replayed it for weeks, breaking down the scene like an accident investigator, trying to find the one move that saved me or the one move I should have made differently. It never changes. I snapped the window up and it kept me alive that night. That's the whole story, and that's everything in it. What ties the first and second stories together is that both attackers disappear into the trees. The woods don't just sit near these places as scenery. They become a convenient erasure. You can see the edge, a dark border where the light ends, and beyond it are limbs, trunks, and the low, patient cover that makes a person vanish. It's not superstition, just geography and shadows. Those trees are perfect places for someone to dissolve into, to make proof and pursuit harder. The hateful truth is that woods offer escape. If you're new here, hit subscribe and the bell. There's more like this coming. That brings me to the oldest one I have. The thing I remember in a different register because I was a child and because the world then already had edges. It was 1992 and our family was on a road trip. No phones that could call home, no maps with blue dot reassurance. We had cassette tapes and a cooler, and a rest stop with a diner light that flickered like a stuttering heartbeat. The rest area sat on the shoulder of an interstate, and behind it rose a line of trees, pines and maples crowded together, their trunks like an audience. My memory of that night is not precise. It's the way childhood memory works, a collage of smells, sounds, and a moment that becomes larger than it probably was. We pulled into the lot because my mother needed to use the bathroom. I remember her walking toward the small concrete building, and then vanishing behind the door. I remember being bored and looking at the ground, at my shoe, at the grease stain of a tire. Then I saw him. A man came out from the shadows near the trees, enormous in that dreamy way adults can be enormous in a child's eyes. He had the kind of size that made the hair on the back of your neck stand erect just to look at him. He carried my mother, not by the arm, not in a delicate hold. He carried her as one might carry a package, as if it were no bother at all. She wasn't moving in any way I knew. Her coat was twisted. My small voice didn't sound like my own when I screamed. "Hey!" I shouted.
The word was tinny in the wide-open lot. For a second, nothing happened. Then my father spun and ran. He ran the kind of run people in movies do when they've never had to test how fast they can get somewhere. He barreled toward the trees. The man set my mother down as if he had been expecting to be confronted. She fell backward into my father's arms, trembling but alive. The man didn't rush away like a cornered animal. He walked. He moved toward the belt of trees and simply walked into it, a figure swallowed by trunks and darkness. My father chased until the tree line swallowed him too. They came back a few minutes later without anyone, empty-handed and more furious than I'd seen him. The police were called. They checked the area and found tire marks in the loam, as if a car had turned in at the edge of the rest stop and left again. There was no plate. There was no face in the photographs the officers took. The man had disappeared into the woods, and so had the tracks. Dry soil, wind, and no evidence anyone else had been there. My mother never had a clear memory of what happened.
To this day, she calls the episode a blur, and when I press, she says she remembers a weight and a smell of pine. The police never identified the man. They wrote a report, took statements, and after a while the paperwork cooled like old coffee. For us, the event settled into family policy. Never go to rest stop bathrooms alone. Everyone uses the term safety rule as if it is a useful thing, but at the core of it there's a child's scream and the sensation that something enormous and foreign brushed up against our lives. I don't tell that story the way some people tell factory-brand traumas with colorful horror. I tell it the way a person tells about a scar. The edges have softened, but the line beneath remains. 20 years later, those tire tracks are the thing I think about, not because they reveal a culprit, but because they confirm something unpleasant. Someone had planned how to move in and out of the trees, and had done so with at least one other person involved. It leaves you wondering about logistics, the car, the driver, the presence of an accomplice, and invents a long shadow across all rest stop trips that follow. When you put the three stories together, three details loom like stakes in the ground. First, unknown blood. In Mari's case, there was blood found on the suspect that wasn't from her and didn't match him. That suggests another person, someone who bled in the dark and left no face in any footage. Second, disappearing into the woods. In both my car knife encounter and in the older rest stop abduction, the attackers simply stepped into the tree line and became the tree's problem, not ours. That border, where light stops and shadow begins, is a convenient place to disappear. Third, the unidentified presence and the tracks. There was a vehicle pattern at the 1992 rest stop, and yet no owner matched. Tires in the dark. The idea of a getaway vehicle by the trees gives an infrastructure to the randomness and makes it feel organized where otherwise it felt like chance. None of those answers are neat. The suspect in Mari's case was in custody for the robbery and assault, but he would not explain the blood. The lab's finding was a blunt reminder that physical arrests sometimes tidy only one part of a worse scene. The man who tapped my car's window walked into the briar and was never seen by police again. The enormous man in the rest stop slipped into the woods like a story swallowed by the page. All three cases ended in some paperwork and hollowing, closure where there should have been comprehension. These encounters changed how we moved through the night. Mari stopped counting on lights keeping danger at bay. She started running a little later and leaving earlier. The kid who got his window slammed shut keeps his doors double locked when the world drops down. Our family refused rest stops without two people present for years. Those changes might be prudent. They might be the only thing between a quiet life and an accident. But they are also a small, bitter tax. The cost of having seen what can happen when darkness floods the edge of the ordinary. The thing people don't often say is how ordinary the victims are. Mari worked nights to pay bills. The man in the car was eating cold fries because he had to work the next day. The family in 1992 were just driving across states to visit relatives. These encounters didn't happen to thrill seekers or to people making risky choices. They happened to people whose lives were ordinary and, for a moment, exposed. That's the real terror, the randomness. You can be careful, and still horrid things happen. That knowledge presses against you like damp trees. I also want to be clear about something else. The woods are not conspirators. They are geography. They are cover and a convenient place for people who want to be unaccounted for. Don't read this as some melodramatic warning that forests are cursed. Read it as a sober note that trees make it easy for a human to vanish. They break sightlines, muffle sound, and become a place where evidence goes to die. That's less poetic and more practical, but it's also more frightening because it has no supernatural explanation, just human beings who use a landscape to avoid being found. There are still questions that keep me awake in a way no mundane worry ever will. Who bled in the trees behind the station that night? Why would someone have another person's blood on them if they weren't related to the event the camera captured? Did someone else get hurt and not reported?
Was there a second assault that happened behind the pumps? The police told us the lab was thorough. The suspect was charged for what could be proved against him. But proved and happened are not the same. There remains a missing thread in the fabric of that night that we have to live with. When you walk past the canopy lights at midnight, or when you pull into a rest stop on a long drive, consider for a second that the border between light and tree line is not simply a background element. It is a place where plans are made and undone, where people can vanish into bark and shadow. It's an uncomfortable thought. It is also the truth of these 3 stories. If you have your own memory, a night you felt watched at the edge of the woods, a moment when something in the trees made your heart stutter, put it in the comments. Stories like these don't come with easy answers, but they do come with company. We learn more about our own survival from hearing each other than from pretending nothing could go wrong. If you want more accounts from the edge of the woods, hit subscribe and keep your headlight aimed forward. The last image I want you to carry is a small one. Headlights sweep the tree line and find nothing. The branches blur, and for an instant the light rests on a patch of leaves that are wet and shiny from someone's blood. You can't see who it came from. You can't know how long it's been there.
You can't tell if the person who left it is still nearby, or if they drove away, or if they never meant to be found at all. It should be illegal to watch something like that, because the knowledge eats at you. But since it isn't, the least you can do is be careful, call when you arrive, and never assume the trees are only scenery.